they moved in on Sunday.
Because of rush.
Better than
Yes.
Kurt's ready?
I
You
guess it's
starting it
me.
today?
Yes.
I've already seen.
Oh, you did?
Let me
Hello,
see if
everybody.
Evans has.
This
Yeah, he
is
did.
the mid-month study session for the Transportation Commission. The agenda's online, and we have one topic on mixed traffic facilities. As a reminder, the public input on this can be managed at the end of each discussion period, so we welcome that at that point. And it looks like Dave is on.
Yes. Good afternoon. So last fall, we got a request from a citizen to look at some other facilities to use here in Lawrence that we haven't really done before, and we're going to talk about those tonight or today, this afternoon. So this kind of started as a reference to looking at a pedestrian route that's being used over by Cordley Elementary on 18th Street between Ohio and Louisiana, and the possible use of advisory bike lanes. So we're going to go through today 3 different design options of what we refer to as mixed traffic facilities. These are in the Small Town and Rural Design Guide manual that was studied by the FHWA, and it gives it's kind of an idea book on different lower speed facilities, low speed, low volume facilities. So mixed traffic facilities are shared between motorists, bicyclists, and sometimes pedestrians. As I said, they're most appropriate on streets with low volume and low speeds. And so we're going to go through 3 types of facilities that they've listed in this book: yield roadways, bicycle boulevards, and advisory shoulders. And I would say that these 3 different facilities, as far as the use of them, they give you some criteria on the volume and speed of the street. And so we're going to go from the lowest to the highest, from the yield roadway to the bicycle boulevard to the advisory shoulder. So yield roadway, these are designed to serve pedestrians and bicyclists and vehicle traffic in the same area of a street. So they serve traffic in both directions, and they don't have lane markings. So a couple of the common elements that they list are that these are narrow streets, 16 to 20 foot roadways. There's no pavement marking. They do incorporate signage to warn users that pedestrians could be expected in the roadway. No markings on the roadway, and there could be or could not be roadside parking in some of these situations. Some of the benefits are these are streets that have naturally lower speeds of vehicular traffic, and they can be used to make connections to your roadway network, whether it's connections for pedestrians and sidewalk gaps and or bike facilities. And so these could be used in areas where you have limited right-of-way, areas that you don't have as much funds to do major roadway improvements to accommodate all users. So here's the criteria that is provided in the guidebook. And if you see over here on the left, there's a graph with speed here on the x-axis, volume on the y-axis, and that's the average operating speed for the motor vehicles. And so the preferred range is under 20 miles per hour. And on the annual daily traffic, it would be approximately 500 vehicles or so a day would be the preferred area, the sweet spot for these facilities. And you can see the cross-hatched area would be areas that still could have the potential for meeting requirements of a yield roadway. So I think some of it would be judgment call on what's a good facility, but there's some criteria there that give you some guidance. Again, these are local residential type roadways, not for through traffic for long distances. And land use would be residential land use areas. Here's a couple of pictures that we've provided that shows some facilities that are being used as yield roadways, and this is predominantly in areas where you don't have sidewalks on both sides of the street. You may have bicyclists or pedestrians that are using the roadway currently, and so these type of situations would be areas where folks are already kind of using it, and the main thing that you do is you provide signage that motorists can expect pedestrians in the roadway. And so again, this is on the lower end of the speed and volume chart for a mixed traffic facility, but that is the first one. So moving on, bicycle boulevards. As you know, we are going to be doing a few of these here in Lawrence next year on 13th Street and on 21st Street. So we're getting the ball rolling on getting a design consultant on board to start discussing what to put together for our bike boulevard projects. These also are low stress shared roadways for bicycle facilities, and designed to offer priority for bicyclists within the roadway that is also shared by motor vehicles. And so there's a few elements that are key to bicycle boulevards. So no one-size-fits-all method, but it incorporates signage and pavement marking, speed management, volume management, and crossing treatments. And so some of the benefits to bicycle boulevards, it increases the comfort for people that are using the roadway as a bicyclist, slows down traffic, reduces cut-through volumes, and this can be done through diverters that only allow one-way traffic at certain intersections, and they also make connections to residential roads to commercial corridors, so they can also be used to make key connections in your bicycle network. And so and for the projects that we're going to be looking at here in Lawrence for bike boulevards on 21st Street between Iowa and Massachusetts Street, I think this is kind of fits some of the criteria here that we're looking at accomplishing with that project. The speed and volume chart, it's a little more on the volume side. It's still the preferred volumes are 20 miles and under, but the volume is a little over 1,000 vehicles per day would fit the preferred criteria. On the graph, it's probably closer to 1,500. And so that's turning an existing street into a bicycle boulevard to be key to try to get your volumes and speeds in that sweet spot. And so that's one of the things we're going to look at when we get traffic counts on these streets here that we're going to look at in Lawrence, get traffic counts and see ways to deter traffic from using the street, to bring down volumes, and also to reduce the operating speed. So again, these are also used on residential streets and primarily used in neighborhoods to make connections. Here's again a list of the features that can be employed with a bicycle boulevards. I mentioned signage and pavement markings that identify the routes, speed management, volume management, and crossing treatments. And I think that's another important thing with these bicycle boulevards. If you're considering it to be a stretch that you're connecting a network, that you want to still be able to maintain bicycle traffic without having a lot of stops or delays, but reduce the speed and volume of motorists. So the other key for these is to improve safety at major street crossings, and so we've obviously we'll need to think about that on the projects that we're going to do here in Lawrence, where we're crossing Naismith or getting down to Mass Street, on how you transition from the more minor residential street to a more major collector street, or crossing a collector street. So there's a number of things that you can do at those crossings with signs and pavement markings, or curb extensions, refuge islands, beacons, or even using bike boxes. Here's a couple of pictures on some bicycle boulevards. Here in the upper left, you can see the large pavement marking here that identifies that as a bicycle boulevard. Here on the upper right, there's an example of some access management where the through traffic, there's no through traffic for vehicles, but there can be through traffic for bicycles, both directions, and the same down there on that bottom picture. I would say one example of a way to limit vehicular traffic and accommodate two-way bicycle traffic would be a project we recently did at Naismith and Crescent, in front of the old bookstore there, on Naismith Drive at the top of the hill, where bicyclists can go east and west from Crescent onto campus to Jayhawk Boulevard, but motorists have to turn there at the intersection. So it's just an example of what you can do at an intersection to limit the volume of traffic but still accommodate cyclists. So the third facility is advisory shoulders. These are relatively new treatment types and would require an approval from the FHWA to implement. I believe when we were looking at putting this together, there was five communities that have done this nationwide. So these facilities are where you create a shoulder for the bicyclists on the side of the roadway that could be too narrow to mark a striped dedicated bike lane, and to still maintain two-way traffic. So if you're thinking about a street and bike lanes need to be at least 5 feet minimum to have a striped dedicated bike lane. If you still want to maintain two-way traffic, have the width for bike lanes. There's a lot of streets that just don't have that width to be able to convert them into facilities with bike lanes. So these are treatments that can be used when you don't have the width, still want to accommodate vehicular traffic, and then provide more of a roadway presence that bicyclists or pedestrians may be present in the roadway. So some of the common elements for this include marking a 4 to 6 foot space on each side for pedestrians and bicyclists, and that's usually done with a dashed white line. You would maintain a two-way center travel lane around 14 to 16 feet width. These work best on road segments with frequent stop-controlled intersections, and probably for stretches of street that are longer. As you get to intersections, you need to end the advisory shoulder 50 to 100 foot before the stop sign, so that vehicles can get over, so that any vehicles turning onto the street would have enough room to turn. So the benefits would be that it does provide more roadway presence, predictability, clarifies the position where a bicyclist or a pedestrian would be on the roadway, supports the natural environment through reduced paved surfaces, and they also decreases vehicle speeds just due to the space limitations of the street. Going to the speed and volume preferred chart there on the volumes. This is a little higher than the bike boulevards in speeds and volumes. It's the preferred range is around 25 miles per hour or less, and then around 3,000 vehicles per day or less for the preferred area. The network applies to constrained connections between built-up areas. And this would, be an area where you don't have enough right-of-way to widen the street out to provide sidewalks and bike lanes. And lane use, these are areas in built-up areas with existing bicycle and pedestrian demand and limited roadway surface. Here's a couple of pictures of some advisory shoulders. Here's one on the top that doesn't have curb and gutter, where you have the 6 feet or so delineated areas on both sides of the road for pedestrians or bicyclists, and then the two-way traffic would use the area between the dashed lines. So if there was just one vehicle going one direction, you'd use the center of the lane, and if there was no pedestrians or bicyclists on either side of the road, you could move over to pass an opposing vehicle. So this picture down here on the left shows an example where they've maintained on-street parking and provided the area for the advisory shoulder here, and again with the narrow through lane. And here's an example here on the right of someone on the other side of the street, the opposing vehicle getting over into the shoulder. But these also would incorporate signage, so you would have a sign that would show the dash lines and say, and it would have a yield to pedestrian indication on the signage. So something like this would, to do one of these, would, as I mentioned, would require interim approval from the FHWA, because they want to kind of understand where you're doing it and studying it. Would be some reporting that would be required with that, but it also would require a lot of education and information to the public, because it's a relatively new thing, and if you come across this for the first time, you may not understand what the dashed lines are for. Is it a one-way street? Is it a two-way street? So there's obviously some things that on the education side that you would need to incorporate with this treatment. Here we've attached some of the references, and we can send this out to everybody on the Small Town Rural Design Guide book and the NACTO guide. FHWA has published document as well for this dashed bicycle lines, which is the same as the advisory bicycle lines, just another name for it. So that's all that we had on presenting this. I would say that we again wanted to put this on the agenda to talk about here with you folks, because we got this request last year, and we actually went out and walked this section of 18th Street from, this is Louisiana here, down, and this is going to the east, and here's Ohio. It's a narrow roadway, and ending here at Tennessee Street, which this doesn't show, but now has a sidewalk ramp and a marked crosswalk here to get to the other side of the street, and obviously Corley's down here at 19th and Louisiana. So last year, again, we got this request from the neighbors on looking at one of these type of facilities. I think it was specifically mentioned the advisory bike shoulder facility, and we went out and looked at it. There was noticed in the morning a lot of pedestrians and bicyclists using it. We got traffic counts in April, and I believe they were in the 500 to 600 vehicle range, and the speeds were, Amanda, what was the speeds? 24 to 27, so relatively low. If we're looking at facility types, it may fit in this yield roadway. Whoops, let me pull this up. Graph here, it is a little more than the 20, but it is in that range that the yield roadway could be a treatment for it. I'm not sure that it would be a great first project for an advisory shoulder in Lawrence. I think it's a short segment. It's two short blocks, so about 650 feet. So you'd have to begin and end those pavement markings in advance of the stop signs at either end of the project, so you're shortening it up, that stretch up. So something that we want to consider in the toolbox of traffic calming, traffic safety, all those different elements that we want to look at with our revised policy, in addition to ways that we can incorporate lower cost facilities to make connections in our bikeway plan, which we're going to work on here, as you know, revising that. And so I think there is some potential with obviously all three of these. We're going to be doing the bike boulevards here in Lawrence this year or next year. But I would say we're open to investigating these further, and in the future when we get requests to accommodate pedestrians and cyclists. So with that, I'd stand for any questions or comments.
Pedestrian counts on the street.
We did not. We have not.
It seems like basically for the yield, you're just acknowledging what's there. Most of the
It's
time.
functioning in that way anyway. without the
All the
signage.
pictures, all the pictures made are small town streets. So small town roads, no curb and gutter. So when people park, they park in the grass.
Yeah, I don't believe there's any parking allowed on that,
Correct.
18th Street, so
But yeah,
it's functioning more like a yield roadway right now where they're sharing space.
yeah.
There's just, that signage just doesn't exist.
The other thing I would worry about is basically documenting that you put that up and, okay, pedestrian and roadway. If what you have now is you already have pedestrian and roadway, you're alerting drivers, hey, there's pedestrian and roadway. If you didn't document that, then the first guy that gets hit, hey, you told me to be in the roadway.
Well, it is a safe route to school and there's no sidewalks, so we're, I think, already telling them to be in the roadway.
Oh, not by signage though.
Well, no, but.
I mean, it just, yeah.
That's a
if you-
good point. From
if you
the
just had the pedestrian
engineering
counts,
liability side, we
Yeah, if you just had the pedestrian cast there saying, hey, people are already here, then you're alerting drivers to the fact.
And so in that example for that street, it's really constrained. As you can see, there's literally no room for a sidewalk without moving the house. You could, other things could be done. You could make the street one way and put in a sidewalk, or there's other things that could be done, probably more expensive, to reconfigure the street to better accommodate pedestrians and cyclists. But for low-cost alternatives, that's kind of what these guidelines are for. So for the lower volume type streets, this was under 1,000, already slower type speeds, and a lot of limitations in the right of way. So
The one thing that would concern me about the advisory shoulders is, like right there, so if you drive down 18th all the time, you know, to get over, when you get to Louisiana to Tennessee, to get over to the right to turn, in case somebody's trying to turn in. And it seems like it would be,
Well, that's why you have to end
Yeah.
at 50 to
Yeah.
100 feet. That's why we're saying like a 600-foot
Wouldn't
stretch
work.
probably isn't appropriate for that, because you're only gonna get 400 to 500 feet of that, and then you're gonna have to transition on each side. It's probably gonna create more confusion.
yeah,
so good.
and
I'd
it's
like to share an experience, and it's, on the surface, it's kind of funny, but when you think about it, it's not. We bike and walk that 18th Street all the time. And about a year ago, we were walking back to the west on 18th Street, and two young boys, probably 6 and 7, were on their own to Cordley, going up that. And there are younger kids, plenty of them, that don't have parents. There's a lot of parents that walk their kids, up that street. Unbelievably, their cat had followed them.
Oh.
And they didn't know what to do, They were just like, go home. That cat was not going to leave. And it's a good thing we came along and we asked who they were. And, parents, you're not supposed to tell people your last name and stuff, but I guess they trusted us. And I knew their parents, fortunately. But April ended up getting that cat in the intersection of 18th and Tennessee. And this was, 8 o'clock in the morning. And we carried that cat all the way until our friend could come and get it. She got all cut up and everything. And these two little boys went on to Cordley. But it was one of those, things that you just think about the potential in a street like that. Now, how this relates to advisory shoulders, but it's just an example of the kinds of things we think about, the engineering aspects of it and stuff like that. But in the real world, things like that happen. And I don't think we can forget those things about something like this. That street is just, I'm not really sure it's on a safe route, is it?
Yes.
I thought 19th was the safe route.
No, I believe
It
that
is?
I believe
Okay.
it is.
Well, that's
The
fine.
conversation during Safe Routes was about putting kids on 18th Street versus 19th Street.
Yeah, and most of the parents over there don't want their kids close to 19th Street.
That was the conversation that we had.
Yeah, and honestly, I tend to, when it was first brought up a year ago, the advisory shoulders, oh gee, that makes a whole lot of sense, but Dave hit on something that I think are right on the money. Education. I mean, you plop something like that down on 18th Street, and everybody's going to be terribly confused about
What,
What-
curiosity question, that photo, of that intersection right there, pull that back up. That guy's been that at least 20, 30 years. Is he supposed to have a minimum setback?
On that house?
Or on the fence? The house is kind of hard to move, but the fence is, because of the situation where you have kids walking down that way, you can't
Yeah.
hop over to the grass right there.
Well, it's interesting, Charlie and I were both at that walkthrough last year, and the guy that lives on that corner,
Yeah.
he's swinging around, Dave.
He's outside the right of way.
No, the other, keep going,
The pink house.
right, keep going, no, no,
Big
no.
bush.
Well, there's the big evergreen shrub on the corner, it's 18th and Tennessee.
Oh,
Yeah, he was,
right here.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
And he came out because he was like really concerned about that we were gonna do something.
Well, that's why I wondered, shouldn't his fence be back?
He's within the right of way is the back.
It's red.
Basically.
But
Wow.
Yeah.
I asked him,
There's our right of way line. I think that house is actually technically on the right of way on the other side.
Wow.
anyway, I asked him,
I'm used to
we
being like-
talked about it for a
yeah,
while.
I'm
and
used
said
to
we
being
were
like 10
thinking,
foot
and
back.
He said, yeah, there's a lot of people walking around here. And I
So
just
nothing
asked
to
him
do.
if he wouldn't mind trimming his shrub,
That guy knows.
because it's a blind corner with that shrub there. And you know, he did. It took him a while, but he did come out and trim that. And now you can see, you know, the sight lines are really a lot better there. But, I mean, these things occur, I know, obviously know that neighborhood real well, but it's just things in an old town like Lawrence that, you know, you're restricted by so many things here. One criteria that I didn't see besides speed limit and volume was distance. You know, you mentioned this was just 2 blocks. It seems like these may be more appropriate for a longer distance run, you know. But if you get too long of a distance, then you have speed limit trouble. You have speeding issues. So.
I think the advisory shoulders might be better for longer distances.
Yeah.
Shortest one, Alta has a publication, came out, looks like last year, and they did a study of the current installations in the country. And the shortest one in this list is Cambridge, Massachusetts, to 900 feet. Most of them are over 1,000.
For the advisory shoulder?
They just presented on the webinar.
Yeah.
Was that on the webinar today?
They were,
Did I look at that, Cambridge?
there was an Alta logo, there was a bunch of examples.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
if they directly talked about that.
I don't know if they talked about that. They talked about one in Minnesota, and the 3 year before and after data on that one, the speeds and volumes didn't change for vehicles. The cycle, the number of bicycles was the same or lower, but there was more people that were using the roadway versus using the sidewalk in that instance. That was in somewhere in Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
It was in Minneapolis. So there's,
Yeah.
it's funny because in the last webinar we did, they said there's 19 locations their way of doing these, but if you go to FHWA's website, they only have 5 locations, 5 cities that have applied for the experimental. So I'm not sure how 19 cities have them when only 5 are listed on FHWA's for approval.
forgiveness.
3 of those are in Minnesota, 1 is in Missouri, and 1 is in Virginia, I believe.
I'm guessing that FHWA hasn't updated their website.
Well, I don't know.
I think it'd be really hard to educate. These kids are going wrong way down the one-ways right now, every year.
What would an education look like? How do we do that in a world where no one reads a newspaper or watches a local?
Facebook and Twitter.
Mhm.
Yeah, and in instances like this, if it's close to the school, I think a lot of it would be through the school and through the site council.
But I mean for
But-
drivers,
Yeah. Yeah, social media seems to be one of the best sources anymore to push information, so. It would need to be several different
Lawrence
means and
Police
methods.
Department. Twitter.
Oftentimes you do education and encouragement together, or education and enforcement together. So you actually have law enforcement out on the streets doing education, and then you do a period of that where they're just like warning, nice,
Yeah, next time you're
nice,
gonna
here's
get-
the information, and then you do a period after that of enforcement.
Mhm.
Those are the most successful ones I've seen.
So my ex-husband once said that Kansans had never even mastered the 4-way stop. And he's joking, but when you get into some of these more interesting intersections and things, which I think are good, it's just.
Well, we're gonna see with the green pavement here this fall, and the education with that, and how we educate bike boxes, and
Mhm.
so. Yeah, and I think at one point Dave just misspoke and said it was interim approval requirement. It's actually approval to experiment, which is different than an interim approval. Like,
And then
we
you have
were
to-
able to do an interim approval for green pavement and through the entire city. My understanding is for the experiment, you've gotta apply location by location. There's a lot more data collection and things like that involved. I think at one point you said experiment and another interim, but they're just a little bit different. It's a little more data and stuff like that.
Is there, for this area on 18th Street, have you guys thought about anything that could be done there that would improve the short of advisory shoulders? Is there any,
He was talking about the old roadways.
pardon me,
Signage for you.
Yeah,
They're
it
already
seems-
doing it.
can we do that, or is that done? I don't remember honestly.
It could be done. I think we would wanna coordinate that with the school and probably if we're doing something new in Lawrence, like putting signage that pedestrians would be on the roadway, or that would be something that we would wanna make sure we communicate the reasons why and discuss that with Transportation Commission and City Commission before we did it. The sign here is, that's just a warning sign. The yellow and blacks are warning signs, so they're not enforcement signs, but it's just to advise folks that you may encounter pedestrians in the roadway, and so could be done.
I think we said before too that there are probably people that use this road regularly. It may be a little bit of a cut through, but I think a lot of the traffic volume on that street is probably people that live, in the area. And that would, that may say something about education and all that, but.
Yeah, there's only about 300 cars each way per day.
Mhm.
So is the issue the speed of the cars? Or just that there are cars?
I think it's just the fact that there are cars and pedestrians mixing.
And, no sidewalk.
Yeah, and just the mixing of them. I don't think there's really a speed or volume issue there necessarily.
Any history of accidents there?
I know I looked before.
Or crashes, pedestrians?
I think we also, Dave, you might have heard somebody mention that Forest might be an opportunity to, all the way from really Barker to Maryland. It's a little wider for one thing, but it is used in a similar way in terms of biking and kids going to school.
There may be appropriate streets in Lawrence where you have an open ditch and you just don't have
Yeah.
the right of way for to add sidewalks and mark bike lanes, so that there may be some appropriate places that any of these could be used.
Looks like there was one accident in 2012 at Ohio. Vehicle crashing.
Nothing with a pedestrian?
Vehicle backing into another vehicle.
Yeah, when we were out there was several pedestrians. There was folks walking, I think, towards KU, and then there was people walking towards the school, so.
I think we saw more pedestrians than cars in the time we stood there.
I don't think we were there on a typical day. I think there's a whole lot more kid traffic to Cordley than we experienced. A normal day, you could have several families and, with dogs and wagons and, the whole, 20, 25 people at one time walking that street. And we didn't see that day we were out there, but I think that's, fall and spring, you're gonna have a whole lot more than we experienced that day. Anyone else?
That section of Forest Avenue is about 1,000 feet.
People do park on both sides of that too, though. That could be an issue. Parallel.
Oh, why is Forest
Yeah, the parking, if there is on-street parking, you would need to make sure that's outside of the area.
What's the width of Forest Avenue, offhand?
I don't.
It's relatively narrow from Barker to Leonard.
Doesn't have curtains on
It's wider
No.
from Leonard to Maryland. And there's parallel parking on both sides.
That was one of the ones that I believe last year got approved on the traffic calming list.
Anybody else have questions or comments? Public comment? Michael?
Thank you. Michael Allman, Sustainability Action Network. Speak in the microphone. I like that presentation, very, very nicely put together. It's interesting that all three of these examples have that motor vehicle travel lanes with no center line. It's a concept, as far as I know, the first I saw, that Dan Burden came up with. He was a transportation director, I believe, for the state of Florida for a while, and now he does consulting. AARP in Barker neighborhood brought him here a couple, 3 years ago, and he presented that concept at that point, I know. And just keep in mind that every local or, residential street in town has no center line, right? I mean, that's just default. So they could easily be, and this is, I think, the most appropriate design application for every local street. My group and the Pedestrian Coalition Healthy Built Environment Work Group is working with the planning department and others on the subdivision regulations to come up with designs for future streets that would be more accommodating for pedestrians and bicyclists. And I think this is maybe something that should be considered as the default design for every residential street. Another thing that I noticed is the reference to 20 miles an hour or less. Excellent idea. Unfortunately, as you probably know, that Kansas statutes do not allow speed limits lower than 20 miles an hour. I checked that out in the statutes and saw that Wabunsee County, for some reason, has an exception to that, and they can lower their speed limits below 20. So it seems like the possibility is there that, with as a charter ordinance, Lawrence could apply for something like that. The ideal speed for like a bicycle boulevard is what I consider a bicycle speed, typical bicycle speed, 12 to 15 miles an hour. So if we could get that, I think we would go a long way to actually making it work. On the yield roadways and the advisory shoulders, I'm not sure if just posting, or for that matter, bicycle boulevards too, just posting the speed limit would accomplish it, even if it were at 15 miles an hour. My neighborhood, Old West Florence, Delaware Street, a number of places in town have 20 miles an hour posted, and for the most part, people ignore it. People just don't see that little black and white speed limit sign necessarily. I think it would help if that speed limit were painted on the pavement, be one of those pavement markings as standard with the triangle, sawtooth symbols, and 20 miles an hour or whatever on the pavement. People would see it then. The main difference between bicycle boulevards and these other two is the physical design of the space, so that there's a possibility of horizontal deflection with chicanes, so motor vehicles have to move sideways. On the yield roadway and the advisory shoulder, the speed constraint is entirely dependent on a psychological feeling of a narrow roadway, but it's still straight. And people, if there's no parked cars, no pedestrians, no bicycles, and no oncoming traffic, somebody could very easily speed. So I want you to keep in mind that a bicycle boulevard does use the horizontal deflection as well as intersection controls. That's a big difference. And then the last thing I wanted to say, Netherlands, of course, and Denmark are kind of in the lead on a lot of this. The most recent, I don't know if it's recent for them, but an innovation that they've come up with beyond any of this is what's called a woonerf. That literally means living street, like a living room, but it's a living street. It's where people get together and gather and share and just meet each other. And it's primarily designed for the people rather than the vehicles. And the speed limits are 5 miles an hour. It just takes it to another level of that narrow pavement, 20 feet or less is standard. Like this is maybe 16, 15 feet pavement, but it also has the horizontal deflection. And it has planters, it has pocket parks, it has a number of things, amenities that take it to another level beyond a bicycle boulevard. It hasn't been considered in Lawrence yet. I keep bringing it up, hoping that it'll gain some traction somewhere. But this kind of shows you how a standard street is converted into a Wunnerf. The travel path is this meandering area of 15-foot wide roadway. So there is space for cars to pass, but it physically slows everybody down and creates an environment for people. So just wanted to present some ideas on that, and that's what I had. Thank you very much. It's a great discussion.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
I looked at Forest Avenue, it's about 25 foot wide, so parking would likely have to go away in order to get all the dimensions that you would need.
Are you talking Leonard to Maryland?
Yeah.
Parker to Leonard?
I think it's all pretty similar. It's Leonard all the way over. I measured it in a couple spots. With the 14, I think a 14-foot width plus your 4 to 6 foot on each side, that would pretty much take up that entire.
There are a lot of driveways here, but there are people that park there. They're probably dependent.
So it's interesting kind of talking, what Michael was talking about when I just was in France and Ho, in their whole city center, they have these wide, what you think are pedestrian ways, and then we stayed at a hotel that was on it, and they had like 10 parking spots for within the hotel, and so there's these bollards that basically come up, and then if you live there or stay in one of the hotels, you push a button, it calls the guy, you tell him where you're staying, and it goes down, you drive in. You have to drive very slow because there's a lot of pedestrians, there's shops all over. Very little vehicle traffic, but they found a way to still allow the vehicles to get into the hotels and the residents, but it's mostly a pedestrian way. So I thought that was kind of an interesting, it was a little surprising when we first saw it. We had no idea how to get to the hotel at first. We're like, these bollards are in the way. They make it really obvious that you can push a button and have them lowered, so. I thought that was kind of an interesting approach to it too.
Was it public road?
I assume it was a public road. I mean, it was in their city center going to all their shops but there was people who lived above, and so there was certain parking areas. So, but there wasn't a large amount of, I mean, we walked up and down it, and there'd maybe be 10 cars in the distance you walked that passed you. And people were going probably 5 miles an hour, because it was a lot of pedestrians.
There's a city center area in Silver Spring, Maryland that has something similar, just a very park-like feel and fountains and, you know, lots of restaurants and stuff. I mean, it's a small area, and the cars, I think there's a certain time of day when cars are not allowed through there, and then in the evening they open up. Slower traffic, but it's like that, it's a gathering space, you know, a lot of people milling around and sitting and talking and eating outdoors.
I think I've been in a place kind of like that on the East Coast somewhere. But it might have the same rule about certain times of day you could be on. I don't think that's going to be a common request from neighborhoods.
Or that even downtown Lawrence, every time that gets brought up.
KU has figured out how to keep cars off their street.
I don't know, we're working on the gate on Sunflower because we're changing software providers, and I told I'll have a solution by Friday.
Be a good idea.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
All we had.
Okay, thanks a lot. That was interesting.
Yeah.
Good information.
So this is where I was at. We're done. I'm just showing whoever. This
That's very
was,
cool.
so see, it looks like a